Hi there, my name is Bandy and this is my channel Bandy's Books. Today is Tuesday, so we're back with another tag video, and today's tag is a little bit unique. The last couple tags that I've done have focused on prompts that related to books specifically. This particular video focuses less on actual books and more on my thoughts around book related topics. It has some controversial questions, some that I'm sure are gonna have really polarizing responses, and it's also like super thought-provoking. As I was reading through these questions to get ready for this video, I was like, wow, I don't really know what I think about this. It's really making me chew on some things, mull some things over. So this tag is called the Philosophy of Reading tag, and it's by Brandon's Bookshelf. It's an original tag from him. He created it, I want to say a week or two ago, and this fits perfectly in line with what his channel is about. If you haven't seen Brandon's Bookshelf, I highly recommend that you check him out. I'm going to be linking his channel in the description below, but he's got some great videos and great content. I find him to be probably one of the most thought-provoking channels that I've found on YouTube so far in relation to books. He covers a wide variety of topics, a lot of philosophy, nature, history, science, all sorts of interesting things, and I find that his recommendations are very unique. I think sometimes on BookTube, people kind of tend to recommend the same things over and over, read the same things over and over, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because we can all read the same book and have different opinions on it. But I also really appreciate that his is unique in that way. I find myself, looking up books that I might not have found naturally on my own. And actually, in this case, today I was at a used bookstore and I found this beautiful Barnes & Noble's classic edition of The Brothers Karamazov. So in honor of this tag, I picked this up. I am going to give this a read, Brandon, if you're watching this. And I think I was inspired after I saw you talking about this in one of your videos. I remember you talking about the brothers, and in particular, one brother who's like atheist and one brother who's devoutly religious, and their difference in opinions, and the one brother trying to get the other brother to admit that if God exists, that God is like a messed up individual because of the things that he does to people. And that was really thought-provoking and interesting to me. And so here it is. This book is massive, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit intimidated by it, but I'm gonna put it on my TBR and get it read real soon. So now that we've talked about that, on to the video. Oh, I think I was gonna mention too, Brandon's goal is, he's at like just under 600 subscribers right now. The last time I looked, he was like in the 550, 560 range. And I know his goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you aren't already following him, highly suggest checking him out. Definitely a really unique channel, worth your time. Really is gonna make you think and think about some books that you haven't necessarily heard of or haven't read before. So we're gonna get into the tag now. This is definitely one of the longer tags that I've seen, and I know that in the original post, it said that you could either answer all the questions or pick and choose as you see fit. I am not somebody that can invest partially. I have invested in doing this tag, so we're gonna do it all the way. I'm gonna do the full 20 questions. So let's get started. Question 1, what's most important, a good character, plot, or message? All right, so initially my impulse is to go ahead and throw the message out. And I think it's kind of between character and plot. I think ultimately I would side with plot, because a really good plot can pull on a weaker character, but a good character doesn't fix a non-existent plot. I think that, message can be important in that it might make a book more poignant or more significant, but I don't think it necessarily has to have a message to be a good book. I've read plenty of like thriller suspense books that were excellent that had no, significant message. I've read many a mystery, things like that, that just really aren't, the most profound book, but they're still really enjoyable reads. I do enjoy really deep character. I don't want to pretend like characterization is not important to the story, but I think that you can overlook a weaker character if the story itself is super engaging. I don't know, I just think if like there's no plot, there's no point to the story, then even a good character that feels really robust and realistic isn't going to be that engaging, because they're not really doing anything. There's no purpose to them being there or existing. In fact, I can think of a couple of character-driven books that I really didn't like specifically because of that, because I felt it was just an interesting character sitting there talking about their thoughts constantly with no point, you know, no climax to the story, no message, nothing. So yeah, I guess I'm strongly on the side of plot being the most significant part of the book. Question 2, should one read books about ideas or opinions they disagree with? Absolutely. I think that we all have a tendency to put ourselves into an echo chamber, right? Naturally, we surround ourselves with people that tend to have similar belief systems to us, culturally, politically, religiously. It's just by nature that's going to happen because you share interests with those people. And so I think that it's important not just to read books that contradict our own ideas and opinions, but to absorb media across all media that does that, to absorb art that challenges us, to absorb news that challenges us, movies, television, what have you. I think all of those things are important because otherwise we can kind of get into like a feedback loop where we're only hearing things that support what we believe already. And I don't think we really grow or really analyze our thoughts without them being challenged. So I think that that's important for us to read books with things that we disagree with. There's like one small caveat for me, and I think that would be that I don't initially feel it necessary to like challenge my beliefs in terms of like humanitarian things. So for example, I'm not going to go read someone's racist manifesto on white supremacy just because it's a differing opinion of mine. I don't feel the need in that case to examine why I think humans should be equal. I don't think that like reading hateful things just for the sake of reading something that's different is really necessary, because I don't really consider that a valid supported opinion to begin with. I do think though, like in terms of politics, religion, culture, philosophy, any of those things, I think that is definitely valid to read something that differs from your own opinion. Number 3, as tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? That's an interesting question. So I don't know that the role of books is really going to change that much just because of technological advances. I think that for most people, books are a distraction or a break from the real world. And I don't know that that's going to change just because there's more technology. I think, in fact, if anything, it might become more significant, more of like a grounding source. I think I see this a lot. There's a lot of young people, like books are having kind of a resurgence, and I see a lot of people, young people, really gravitating towards books. And I think in a world that's like super obsessed with social media and constant information, where kids are constantly getting feedback, like there's immediate up to the minute news on your phone. You have Facebook shouting opinions at you constantly, Instagram inundating you with short snippets about everything that's going on in the world, what everybody's doing minute to minute. I feel like a lot of young people are actually gravitating back towards books because it's like a form of escapism. And I think as we become more technologically advanced and we integrate more tech into our lives, books will remain that way, remain an escape from reality, an escape from, the grind of day to day, and a way to escape into, different worlds, different scenarios. I don't really see that changing too much. I think the only thing that may change is that we may gravitate away from print books and more into like ebooks or audiobooks, but I just don't see that people that enjoy escaping into books, that's gonna like suddenly change or cease to exist because of tech. Question 4, how important are summaries, review, and art in your book choosing? Okay, so I feel like that's 3 individual questions in one. Let's go in the order of how I buy a book. So if I'm like perusing the bookstore and I don't have a specific book in mind, I'm just there looking, see what looks interesting. The first thing that I'm going to notice is cover art. Now, I would be lying to you if I told you that I didn't pay attention to cover art and that didn't have importance. And I feel like pretty much anyone that says they don't pay attention to art on books is maybe lying to you, or at least lying to themselves. Our eyes are designed to be attracted by specific things. Now, different people find different things attractive, but all of us have an aesthetic that we find pleasing. And by nature, when we're walking around, if something is aesthetically pleasing, we're going to be drawn to it. That's just reality. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to pick up that book for that reason, but if something is aesthetically pleasing, you're more likely to at least look at it. And so I would say that art is significant for me. When I'm like, I like really bright colors, I like bright patterns. There's definitely an aesthetic that draws my eye. So when I'm walking through the bookstore, yeah, do I pick up things that I don't necessarily find pleasing? Yes, I do, because I've found that sometimes the cover doesn't make the book, obviously. Or most of the times the cover doesn't make the book. But I do find that certain aesthetics on book covers indicate certain aesthetics in writing, and those are things that, I've come to associate with certain things that I like. So the art definitely is like the foot in the door. And then after I've observed the art, I pick up the book and read the summary. So if I think that this book looks really interesting on the outside, I'm going to see if it looks interesting on the inside. I read the summary. If the summary is something that I feel, resonates with me, if it sounds like it's going to be emotionally impactful, a good escape, whatever, then I'm pretty likely to buy the book between a good cover and a good summary. And then reviews. So I don't know that reviews for me personally are that important. Honestly, until about 2 months ago when I joined book social media, I don't know if I actually really ever read that many reviews. I wasn't up to date on what books were coming out, who was like a trendy author. I only actually really found out about trendy authors because my mom reads voraciously, and she would be like, oh, this book's amazing, you have to read it. And I mean, I'm sure some of them were very popular. Like I know I read The Night Circus right when that came out. But I didn't personally recognize that as being trendy. It was just something my mom was like, this is really good, you have to read this. Now that I'm involved in social media more, I'm exposed to a lot more reviews, because obviously on BookTube, people do a lot of review videos, or like my end of the month wrap up where they summarize everything they're reading. And on Bookstagram, one of the biggest formats on Bookstagram is, posting a picture and writing a review of a book that you've read. And so I am exposed to a lot more opinions on books, but I have found that, reviews are really subjective. Books are a subjective thing. I have found there's certain books that I absolutely love that other people have hated, and vice versa. An example comes to mind where like Addie LaRue, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, is like one of the most popular books in the world right now. And it's all over Book Talk, all over Bookstagram, all over BookTube. Everybody's like, books that changed my life, books that I wish I could read for the first time again, best books, my top 10 list, everything, you name it, it's on all of those. And I'm super happy for the people that enjoyed it, but I didn't personally like it at all. And well, I didn't not like it at all, but I was really disappointed with it. It was probably my most disappointing read in October. And that's exactly it, that it's subjective. Something that people are raving about, there's always going to be people that don't like it, and that's okay. So I take reviews with a grain of salt. On the occasion that I do read them, like on Instagram when I'm, interacting with people and engaging, I read lots of reviews. And then if it's somebody where I know we have similar tastes, we read a lot of similar books, I'll take that review and go, okay, yeah, so-and-so liked it, I'm probably a little more likely to like it. But there's very few people where I treat their reviews as like gospel. My mom is one of those people that I really trust her reviews of books, because there's very few times where she's led me astray. But yeah, generally the reviews are kind of maybe after I've read a book and decided how I feel about it. Sometimes I'll read reviews just to see what other people thought. So I guess that would be where it's more important, is kind of it makes me feel like either I'm, out at the end of like the spectrum, or I'm kind of in the normal. Should one ever skim or scan a book? Is question number 5. I have watched quite a few of these videos already, and everybody's answer seems to be no. And in some ways I do get that answer, but then I'm like, what do people do in bookstores? Because like for me, if I look at the cover art and I look at the summary and I'm still not sure, the first thing I do is skim or scan the book. Like, I mean, I obviously can't sit down in a bookstore and read it in the same depth that I sit on my couch at night and read. So, I'll skim or scan a few pages, see if the author's writing style is something that I gravitate towards, see how the characters seem off the bat, if if it seems like it's really dry, that kind of stuff. So I think that's appropriate when you're getting ready to buy a book, to skim or scan a little bit to see, if it fits. Now, if it's skimming or scanning a book and then like reviewing it, like you've read it, I don't think that's necessarily appropriate. I do see sometimes, indications of that in social media. I think there's a lot of pressure for all of us to read, astronomical numbers of books each month, for whatever reason. Saying, oh, I read 2 or 3 books this month doesn't sound as exciting as, I read 72 books this month. And so I think in some cases people do skim and scan books and then give reviews. And I don't necessarily think that that's fair. I think if an author takes time to write a book, we should take enough time to read it properly. And if we don't have the time to read it properly, we should just put it away until we do. So I guess skimming and scanning is appropriate when deciding to buy a book, and that's about it, really. Or you know what? There's one other case. After you've read the book, like if you're going back, I do this often. I've read a book, I've thought about there's a mention of food somewhere in the book, and I want to find that mention and annotate it. Like, say I didn't have something to annotate it right then, I'll skim backwards and find it. But yeah, not really skimming it in the purpose of reading it, just finding something that I remembered. 6, should reading always be enjoyable? So like I said, I watched a couple of these videos, and I had one answer that resonated with me quite a bit, and that was from Steve Donahue. I'll also link his channel in the comments, in the description as well. And he basically pointed out that all books are enjoyable unless they're really dull or tedious. And I tend to agree with that. I think a book can elicit really negative emotions, or what we perceive as negative emotions, and still be an enjoyable and worthwhile read. For example, I read recently The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. It was super depressing. From start to finish, it was depressing. Like, the characters never get a break. You're just like, man, these poor people. And I didn't leave it feeling good. I left it feeling angry and sad, but it was an enjoyable thing. Like, sometimes books are meant to make us feel deep and profound things, and sometimes those things are uncomfortable. And I think that's part of the enjoyment of reading, is challenging ourselves to feel different things via these other worlds that authors have created. So yeah, I think unless a book is just like watching paint dry on the wall, it's an enjoyable book. 7, is it important to be well read? I don't know. I feel like my initial response to this might be different than what's intended. I think that when people call themselves well read, they sound very pretentious. There's like millions and millions and millions of books in the world, and reading a small handful of them, I guess if you qualify yourself as being well read because you've read a handful of them, then cool. I also think it's kind of a little classist in a way, because reading and having access to books is kind of a privilege. Living in a place where you have access to a library close by, having transport to get to the library, having access to technology to get ebooks, having the money to spend on buying books, all of those things are kind of a privileged thing. And so being well read is, in a lot of cases, a benefit of having the ability to access books. Obviously you have to feel passionate about reading. Not everybody that has access to books takes advantage of that access. I'm not saying that it's solely based on the access, but I'm saying that there's people that might be better read that just don't have the same ability to read because of, their socioeconomic situation, because of the country that they live in, because of the infrastructure in the area that they're at. Things like that do play into being well read, and I think sometimes we put too much importance on that. Sometimes also I feel like in that pretentiousness that comes with being well read, people kind of equate it with intelligence. Like, oh, I've read the classics, so I'm super well read, whereas somebody that reads fluffy romances is not well read. Or I read high literature and you're reading that trash. Like, to me, those are all kind of irrelevant, I guess. Like, I think if you read a lot, to me, it doesn't really matter if you're reading classics, you're reading fluff romance, you're reading young adult fantasy. I don't really feel the need to shit on anyone for their book selections. If you read a lot, then to me, you're well read. And if you don't read as much as you'd like to because you don't have access, I don't really think that makes somebody better just because they have the ability to go find books. 8, what is your book buying process? So I already talked about this a little bit in the question about summaries, covers, and reviews. But basically, if I'm going to the bookstore without anything specific in mind, I look for cover art that I gravitate towards. I read the summaries, I maybe scan the first couple pages. If all those things are good, then I'll put the book in my basket and buy it. If it is in terms of book buying, let's see, Other than that, it's not really technically buying, but I do go to little free libraries a lot because I have so many books here. As I finish them, I like to drop them off in little free libraries. And so that process kind of is similar. I'll look for things that maybe I've been interested in reading, stuff that catches my eye. But yeah, so basically eye-catching cover, summary, first couple pages, bye. Question 9, what is your reading process? I don't know that I have a precise reading process. I pretty much read whenever I can get time in to read. I usually, on waking up, will get up and read for at least a few minutes in the morning. Like, I'll get up, get lunches ready, make myself some tea, say bye to my partner, and then when the house is quiet and I have a few minutes alone, I'll sit in bed for like 15-20 minutes and try to get in some reading. I usually bring a book with me to work. I do listen to audiobooks at work when I'm doing like billing or something that doesn't require a lot of thought. And then on my lunch break, I'll actually take out my like physical book and read at lunch for 15 or 20 minutes as well. When I get home, if I have the house to myself, I'll usually sit down for a few more minutes and try to read before like getting dinner ready and doing the stuff that I'm going to do for the evening. And then I do like to try to read in the evening as well. My favorite thing is like sitting at the end of the night in a hot bath with a good book and just like decompressing, being in silence with my book and just completely relaxing. But if I don't do that, I'll at least try to sit in bed and read for a while as well. So that is my reading process, I guess. I don't know if that's what was intended with this question, but it's pretty much as simple as that. 10, how do you use what you read? So I really like this question. I use what I read in multiple ways. First, of course, I use reading to accrue more knowledge. It helps me to deepen my understanding of things, especially in the sense of like nonfiction. You know, it helps me to understand world events, politics, psychology, sociology, whatever subject I'm reading on. It helps me to have a deeper understanding, maybe challenge some, set beliefs and things like that. I think it also helps my creativity. I think in the case of reading fiction, it forces our brain to imagine and view things that don't exist. I mean, when you're reading fantasy, for example, like everybody gives fantasy a hard time, but when you're reading fantasy, you're reading something that doesn't exist. So you have to use the power of your brain to imagine a whole world and a whole new structure and things that bend reality. And that develops creativity in your brain. And I think that's equally as important as deepening your knowledge and your intelligence on the nonfiction end. And the third thing that I use reading for is actually language acquisition. So I'm fluent in Spanish as well as English, and I'm completely self-taught in Spanish. I didn't take Spanish in school. I actually took French in high school, and then in college I took French and Arabic. But I taught myself Spanish, and Spanish is the only language that I'm fluent in so far. The reason is because, I A, was surrounded by it and listened to it, but B, I became, in more advanced fluency because I read so much. I started with children's books, and as my Spanish has gotten better and better, I've picked up bigger and bigger books. I have read, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've read Sandra Cisneros, translations of all her books. I've read like Tres Triste Tigres, which is a book about Cuban colloquial language. I've read The Cemetery of the Forgotten Books by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Like, I've read some pretty hefty books in Spanish at this point, and that for me has made my Spanish so much better. It's improved my grammar. It's really enhanced my vocabulary. It's also given me the ability to recognize different colloquialisms. I've done a lot of traveling in Spanish-speaking countries, and so I do recognize a lot of colloquialisms naturally, but for the countries I haven't traveled to, the books that I'm reading from those countries help me recognize more colloquialisms as well. And it just reinforces that language that's there. There's a lot of subjects that I don't necessarily talk about in a day-to-day world. I don't go to my job and talk in Spanish about, astrophysics. But I can always pick up a book in Spanish about astrophysics and reinforce that vocabulary and that knowledge in Spanish about it. So for me, it really, really has helped increase my linguistic ability. I also have books in French. I studied French for a couple years in school. I can read it pretty decently, but I don't speak it well because I've never really had anyone to practice with over here on the West Coast. And reading has kept it fresh. It's kept me from forgetting all of it. So when I go back to France, or I get up into Canada and the French speaking areas, I still have some retention of the French that I've learned. So I think that that's a really powerful tool. I think that, linguistic acquisition is a great reason to read. Question 11, if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read it? I don't want to download books to my brain. I feel like that's cheating. And I feel like it kind of defeats the purpose. Like I said in the previous answer, reading enforces creativity, enforces knowledge, enforces language acquisition. And yeah, I get that if you download it into your brain, you still have that knowledge, but I don't know that you would necessarily have the benefit of the creativity. I don't know if it would develop you in the same way because it's not challenging. Sometimes it's a struggle to finish books. Like sometimes you pick up something and you really have to work to get through it. And I don't think that being able to just implant it into your brain would give you that same effect. So I am not pro downloading books to your brain, and I think if that ever became an option, I would be strictly against it and I would continue to read. The only reason I could see maybe downloading a book to your brain is say you've already read something and you want to really remember it in detail, then maybe that might be different. But if it's a new book that I haven't read, no, gonna read it. Question 12, what are your views on rereading a book? I don't know. I feel like this is one of those weird things that people get shamed for sometimes on social media as well, and I don't really understand why. I love rereading books. I definitely, as an adult, don't reread books as much as I did when I was younger. I think now, because I have so many books on my shelf, that I feel like, I can reread when I've gotten through a more significant portion of the ones that I have waiting. But I will say that certainly in times of stress, when I'm feeling really bad, maybe depressed, angry, whatever, when I'm feeling really negative, rereading is a great tool for relieving anxiety. And that's because when you're reading a book that's new, not that it's a negative type of anxiety, but it can be anxiety inducing when you don't know what's going to happen to the character. You're trying to, get through this book. You have to keep stopping and dealing with real life. That can create a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of an intense anticipation. And that's a pleasurable experience, but when you're already wound out with stress and negative feelings, sometimes that can be a little overwhelming. So rereading something for me actually really helps me. It helps to focus my energy into something where it's not the world that I'm dealing with that's stressing me out. It's another world. I can kind of lose myself in it, but I know where the story is going, so I don't feel so about it. I know that when I was young, I reread the Harry Potter series probably 12 times. I think I've read Hunger Games 4 or 5 times. I know I've read The Lord of the Rings more times than I can count, in The Hobbit as well. And I'm sure there's other ones that I've reread as well. And like I said, for me, that's a stress relief kind of a thing. It's like a warm hug from a friend that you've been missing for a long time. And I don't see anything negative about that. I mean, I think people should just read what makes them happy at the end of the day. If you're not enjoying what you're reading, why are you reading it? Question 13 and 14, I feel kind of go hand in hand. What makes a book good? What makes a book bad? So again, this is super subjective. What makes a book good and bad for each person is going to be really different. What makes a book good for me is going to be a strong plot, characters that make me feel something. I don't have to like the character. I can really dislike a character. They could be evil, creepy, weird, eccentric, whatever. But they have to make me feel something. Definitely, I think it helps if you can relate to at least one character in the story. I think a good message helps as well. I like something that, makes you think, deeply. And I think something that makes you feel some sort of emotional response. Doesn't have to be, again, a positive emotion. You could feel sad, you could feel angry, all of those things work. So I guess emotional response, solid plot, strong characters, and a good emotional response. Also, even pacing. I've read some really good books that had great plot and great characters where the pacing was really off, and sometimes that can really screw up the book as well. On the converse, a bad book, a non-existent plot, Mary Sue characters, all over the place pacing, no significance, no emotional response. None of those things exist, then again, why are we reading it? 15, how do you feel about not finishing a book? I have strong feelings about not finishing a book. I try my hardest not to not finish books. And the reason is when I was younger, I used to write fiction, like little short stories and things like that. And those weren't even like amazing stories. It was just writings of like a teenager to an early 20 something. And I know how much effort it took for me to write 5 or 6 pages of a story. And then I imagine somebody spending, time writing something like this where it's, 800 pages and this huge story. And that could take a lifetime. So I think I really do a disservice to an author if I don't, and maybe this is too much self-importance, but I think it's a disservice to the author if I don't actually try to read the book all the way through. That being said, I'm also not like a masochist where I'm going to just read something I absolutely hate or I'm bored out of my mind. So I have a process if I don't finish a book. I have to give a book 3 tries. If I pick up a book and I'm not liking it initially, I get about 50 pages in and it's just really not my vibe, I'll set it down, put it back on my bookshelf, and then I'll try again in a couple months. And if the second time it doesn't work, I'll put it back, try a third time. If after the third time it's still not working for me, then I'm sorry, it's gonna go. And the reason I do it this way is because I've had it happen several times where I have started a book, not liked it, put it down, and come back to it later and actually ended up really loving it. In fact, The Night Circus, which is one of my favorite books, was just like that. The first time I read it, I felt like it was super dry and boring. I got about 50, 60 pages in, and I'm like, nothing's happening, and I don't care about these characters, and this is no good. So I put it away, and then I was in a different place like a month or 2 later, and I picked it up, and I ended up like reading the whole thing in one night and loving it. And so that's why I try to give books multiple chances, because sometimes my headspace affects my perception of the book. Something that might irritate you when you're in a bad mood might not be so irritating when you're in a good mood. And so I think it's fair for me to give books more than one try. 16, should the author's personal life matter at all? The popular answer for this seems to be no. I've seen quite a few of these videos now and everybody says no. I don't necessarily disagree, but I think that there are some circumstances in which an author's personal life does matter. So I agree that if somebody has a different political opinion, religious opinion, cultural differences, all those things, I don't think that that is a reason to not read an author's work. That's fine. But if somebody's a shitbag and they're like, I don't know, accused of a string of violent rape, or they've been caught murdering someone and they're still alive and their books are actively putting money in their pocket, I don't really feel like I want to read something. I don't honestly even care if it's the best book that's ever been written and that everybody raves about it. And I know maybe I'm putting more importance on myself than I need to. I know that I'm not like stupid enough or deluded enough to think that like my $17 or $20 book purchase is going to make a huge dent in them financially. But morally, I feel that I don't need to read books by murderers and rapists and like really atrocious people. And that I don't know, I just don't think it's necessary. I know that there's like this whole thing about separating the art from the artist, and I do understand that. And I think it becomes a little bit different like if the person is dead. If the person is dead and they're not benefiting any longer on their artwork, and like it's their kids or theirs or whatever, then I don't feel necessarily as bad as like, in the case where they're still living and actively profiting. But I don't know, like I said, I don't really feel the need to overlook somebody's really shitty indiscretions to enjoy a book. Maybe I miss out. Maybe that's like going to be labeled as virtue signaling, and that's fine if it is. Ultimately, I have a line, like a moral line that I'm going to draw, and that's okay. If you don't feel that way, that's fine. That's your business. But for me, I do think there are instances where somebody's such a shitty person that I don't need to support their work. Okay, 17. If you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? That's hard because I feel like without one genre, another genre is not as enjoyable. Like, I think part of the enjoyment of all genres is that there's a variety and you can kind of switch back and forth. Like, it gives you time. Like, say, for example, in October, I read nothing but horror. And by the time I was done with the month, I was like, I'm good on horror books for a while. I'm missing, historical fiction. I'm missing nonfiction, missing fantasy. Like, it gives you time to miss something else, and that missing it makes you enjoy it more. So I don't know if any genre at all would be as enjoyable if that was the only genre you could read. But say I had a gun to my head and I'm forced to pick, I would say that I would probably go with nonfiction. And if I had to narrow that down even further, I guess I would pick historical nonfiction. I think in terms of history, I mean, you could read endlessly. You could read about ancient civilizations, how man came to exist, how the continents became what they are today, how, the origin of each nation, wars, inventions. I mean, the list is endless. If you went into like historical nonfiction, you could probably read for the rest of your life and not cover every single subject. So I guess at least in that case, it would still be very diverse. There'd be a lot of things to keep interesting, and could read, historical crime one day, and then like war the next, and then, the advancement of civilization next, and you could move it around quite a bit. Question 18. Do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? I actually do quite often. I participate in a lot of like book swaps and book giveaways and things like that through both a Facebook group and through Instagram. And I have had many people send me surprise books. And in that case, when they send me surprise books, I really don't know anything about them. A lot of the times I'm not even expecting a package and a book will show up on my door. And in those cases, I honestly try not to really like delve into it. I'm just like, oh, this person thinks I'm gonna like this. Let me just read this without any expectations. And even with like popular books, I try to avoid knowing too much about the book. I try to avoid like saturating myself with other people's opinions and reviews and feedback, because I want to go into a book and just enjoy it, be surprised by it, not be like, oh, this person said this character is so annoying, because then I have that like thing set in my head that character is going to be annoying, and then I'm more likely to find that character annoying. You know what I mean? So I like to go into books blind. It's kind of similar to how I travel. When I took a couple years back, I took off for 2 years to travel, and when I was doing that, I honestly most of the time would book a ticket into a country and a ticket out of a country and do nothing, like not pre-plan anything else in between. I would get to, whatever the first city was, and I'd stay there as long as I wanted. And when I felt like I was done, I'd go to skyscanner.com and pick the least expensive flight out, and that would be how I'd decide where I was going next. And I would just kind of hop around country to country, or like around cities within a country, completely sporadically and randomly without any plan. And I think that makes the adventure better. And I hold that theory with books as well. Like going in a little bit blind helps you enjoy it more. 19. What author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into, and why? So in terms of genre, I would say that there's not really any genre that I can't get into at all. I definitely have preferences. I would say that romance is probably the genre that I like the least. And even then it's dependent. I have read good romance books. I just find that a lot of the times like the fluffy romances are not that realistic, and I don't love that. If a book is set in the real world, for me, I like there's only so much suspension of disbelief before it like kind of starts to mess with the story for me. If it's a fantasy world, whatever, I'll suspend as much disbelief as you want, because I'm going into it knowing that this is not based on reality, right? But I don't know. So I do struggle with romance. I don't hate the genre, and I'm not shitting on anyone that likes it. I'm actually going to be doing an all romance month coming up, just to see, catch up on some of the romance reads, challenge myself to read a genre I'm not like normally inclined to read. So I mean, even though I don't love it, I think there's still valid reads in it. Author, it's hard because, I think there's a lot of great authors out there, and I think, I don't know if I can even identify one that I don't love completely, or I mean that I dislike completely. I would say an author that I struggle with a little bit, but who I respect, and actually one of her books is one of my favorites. It's just like the rest of her books that I don't really love, is Margaret Atwood. I love The Handmaid's Tale, and I actually have The Testaments, which is the follow-up to The Handmaid's Tale, on my bookshelf, and I'm hoping to read it soon. I don't love Margaret Atwood's writing style. It's kind of stilted and a little dry, and for me, it's just not really the most enjoyable style. The concepts for her books are amazing. The plots, the characters, all that is fantastic. It's just for whatever reason, the way that she writes, it just doesn't resonate with me as well. In the case of The Handmaid's Tale, for example, I found the book so interesting, the plot so interesting, that I pushed through a writing style that I don't necessarily care for. I would say that there's some other authors that are kind of similar in that way. Like there's Louise Erdrich. I find her writing kind of the same way, a little quirky, a little stilted in points. But a lot of the times her plots are so compelling that I'll get through the style that I don't necessarily enjoy. I'm trying to think if there's any author that I really can't stand at all, like hands down. I need to do a Google real quick. I can think of one person. Who wrote? Sorry, give me 1 second. The book. It's a famous author, and I think I've tried reading like 5 or 6 of his books, and they were all just really, really weird. Kurt Vonnegut, that's who I was trying to think of. So Kurt Vonnegut, he's somebody that I do not get. I know that he's really popular. There's like cult following of a lot of his books. I've tried to read his books over and over again, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like they come across choppy and like too eccentric, and I don't know, I just don't get them. I read a couple of his books in school, and then I tried listening to his book Galapagos on audiobook because I spent 2 months in the Galapagos Islands and I loved it, and I was so fascinated with it, and I was like trying to look up everything about it, and I came across this book by Kurt Vonnegut, and I listened to it on audiobook, and honestly, I don't know, I couldn't do it. I listened to like halfway and then just was like, I can't. So there's probably one author that I solidly think I don't care for. Culture. I think the only, series, sorry. We'll go with series first. I don't love the Twilight series. I guess I should say in general that I don't love series that support really toxic relationships for young people. I think that, obviously toxic relationships exist, and I think that obviously when we're writing about real life, we're going to write about people that are abusive, people that have been abused, things like that. We can't pretend like those things don't exist. However, I kind of take issue with series that glamorize toxic or abusive relationships for young people. I think Twilight was one of those ones where I felt like, I didn't even read the series, but my perception of it is that there's a pretty unhealthy relationship between the two main characters. I know that some of the popular YA series right now kind of have that same thing, and it's always like portrayed like the guy is the bad guy, and if the girl just loves him hard enough, he'll not be the bad guy anymore. And I think that's not the best messaging for people that are young and malleable and still figuring out like who they are and what they want in their relationships. So I guess series that follow that trope, that to me I'm not a big fan of. And then culture. I don't really dislike any culture. I don't care, like I said, I've mentioned before, I don't care if you read classics, I don't care if you read fluff, I don't care if you read, the $5 paperback series that you find in the airport. If you enjoy what you read and you're super into it, kudos to you. I'm so happy for you. I just want people to enjoy books and, whatever reading culture they fall into because of that, great. I think the only thing that I genuinely cannot stand is like elitism and pretentiousness. And I don't know that that's so much a culture. I will say that I think sometimes you find it in specific types of cultures more than others in terms of like reading culture, but I have seen it across all groups. And I think that, reading really doesn't have a place for pretentiousness. I don't think that it should be a competition. And I don't think that your selection of books makes you inherently better than someone else. I think that, what makes somebody a good or valuable human is like who they are inside, what they do on their day-to-day life, the choices they make, how they treat people. And honestly, their book selection to me says very little about them as a person. Just, people use reading for different things. They use it for decompression, they use it for knowledge acquisition, they use it to inspire themselves, to stress relief, all sorts of different things. And so I don't think that reading tells you someone's inherent value. And I think that pretentious culture of like, oh, I'm better because I read, high literature and you're reading trash romance. Like, I think that can go. And finally, the last question, 20. Do you think everyone should read and why? I don't know. That's a weird question for me. Do I think everyone should read? I think everyone should have the ability to read. I think basic literacy is important worldwide, and I think everybody should have the ability to read, should be taught to read. And then I think that everybody should have access to books to read if they want to read. I think that everyone should have libraries within their towns, have access to ebooks, those sorts of things. Do I think they should read just because they have access? If they don't enjoy it, then no. If they enjoy painting, if they enjoy cooking, if they enjoy hiking, if they enjoy travel, whatever, like what have you, do the thing that you enjoy. I don't know why someone should be forced to read if it's not pleasurable for them. I mean, aside from the basic knowledge, obviously, like I do think, as children, it's important for us to teach, to be taught to read. But as an adult, if you have your basic education, your literacy, and the opportunity to read if you want to, and you choose not to, that's fine. I don't. Reading should be enjoyable, and if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. So that was the last question. I hope that this was interesting. I tried to be I am a pretty direct person normally, and so I tried to be fairly direct in my answers, but I feel like I kind of ended up still meandering and wandering in some of them. And that's because I'm thinking. A lot of the times I'm just responding off the cuff. I don't write my videos out or plan them ahead of time. I might like skim the questions just to kind of give myself a little bit of time to think about it, but I don't really script these out. So sometimes when I'm thinking, I start to meander and wander in different directions. So hopefully this was interesting and most of it made sense. I know it's going to be probably a longer tag video. Again, I want to shout out Brandon's Bookshelf. It's an excellent channel. This tag was super, super interesting. His channel is super interesting. Help him get to his goal of 1,000 followers by the end of the year. Go check out his link in my description. And also, I am going to tag Lindsay's Little Library in this one. I don't think she's done this tag yet, and I'm really curious what her answers will be. She's also another super lovely channel. I'm sure a lot of you already follow her. I know some of you found my channel through her. So I'm gonna see if I can get Lindsay to do this next, and I'll be tagging her in my description as well. So if you aren't for some reason following Lindsay, also check out her channel through the link in my video. So that is the end of the philosophy of reading tag. And if you like this video, hit the like button. Help me know if the tag videos are working for you, and let me know in the comments how you feel about my answers. Was there anything that you really strongly disagreed with? Anything that you vehemently agreed with? Am I like completely wildly off on anything? I actually really love to debate and discuss, and even if you come at me and you're like, hey, I think you're wildly incorrect, I'm totally open to that discussion. So please blow me up in the comments. Let me know how you felt. And if you're not already subscribed, consider hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell. I do post a lot of regular book content. Since I started this channel, I've not missed a single day where I was supposed to post a video. So you can always rely on me for a lot of different book content. Again, I'm Caitlin Bandy. This has been Bandy's Books, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.